Welcome to this reader feedback edition of Forthright, beginning with a reading of a column describing a visit to Spokane by Alveda King, nationally recognized author and civil rights activist, published March 10, 2022 in the Spokesman Review. MLK Jr.'s niece brings message of unity, but the media wasn't there to hear it. Last weekend, a major political party hosted a nationally known civil rights activist. She gave a keynote speech to more than 400 at a formal dinner on Saturday, followed by a free public event in Spokane Valley on Sunday afternoon. And in other news, next weekend, a small group of neo-Nazis has organized a small private gathering in the Hayden Lake area. Which do you suppose was reported on the front page of the Northwest section this week? The fringe outliers in North Idaho, of course. Being ignored was disappointing to Maggie DeMauro, a volunteer with the Spokane County Republicans and organizer of Alveda King's schedule for the weekend. Anyone familiar with the old adage of, if it bleeds, it leads, will not be surprised at the missing coverage. Normal people gathering to celebrate building unity doesn't bleed enough. The Spokane area events also included a Sunday morning community roundtable, an opportunity to sit down with King, granddaughter of the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and his wife Alberta, daughter of the Reverend A.D. King and his wife Naomi, and niece of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. A sense of family legacy is important to King. Her mother was the one who taught young Alveda to put God first, me second, because if I don't care of me, I can't help anyone else, then family, then church, then community. Close quote. She feels a strong connection to her grandfather, who, according to family history, advised her mother not to have an abortion because he had a vision of who Alveda would grow up to be. I am a guardian of the King family legacy, King said Saturday. I have been charged now as the oldest in my generation to teach people about God, about Jesus Christ, about nonviolence, that we're all one blood and one race. Close quote. Unity was the emphasis at Saturday's Lincoln Day dinner, starting with an invocation led by the Reverend Amos Atkinson Jr. of Spokane's Calvary Baptist Church, the oldest African-American church in the state of Washington. Masters of Ceremonies Katara Johnson-Jones and Jonathan Bingle repeated the theme as they introduced each speaker. Quote, we have to stop calling America racist because if she was racist, she wouldn't be worth fighting for, end quote, said Johnson-Jones, a U.S. Army veteran. Quote, the Republican Party has to remember what Lincoln stood for and what he said. This country can stand united, close quote. Sunday afternoon's presentation at St. Mary's Catholic Church attracted at least 500 listeners, DeMauro said. In addition, DeMauro said Sunday morning's brunch brought together a cross-section of about 30 community leaders. Quote, Spokane is very polarized and we need to start having deep conversations, leaving politics out of it and focus on how to help the community, DeMauro said. If she was a liberal, would she have gotten news coverage? And that's kind of sad. That's how polarizing it is. While brunch was sponsored by the GOP, it wasn't political, close quote. According to DeMauro, attendees at the community roundtable included Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers, Spokane Mayor Nadine Woodward, Spokane's Civil Rights Coordinator Gerald Haynes, Luke Jasmine, Phil Altmeyer from the Union Gospel Mission, attorneys Bevan Maxey and Morgan Maxey, GOP State Committeeman Matt Hawkins, Diversity Officer Trainer Katara Johnson-Jones, former City Councilman Mike Fagan, Mary and Michael Nguyen, Michael Brown from the Spokane East Side Reunion Association, and Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. King usually turns down speaking invitations, but told DeMauro she felt called because of the polarization. Quote, she said she was guided in her heart to come to Spokane, DeMauro said. Most speakers want to get paid, but all she asked for was an honorarium to her pro-life ministry, close quote. King served 4 years in the Georgia legislature as a Democrat, has more recently been supporting pro-life Republicans, but rejects political labels. Her focus on the value of life from womb to tomb, as she puts it, has put her at odds with her old party affiliation. She recently founded a new ministry called Speak for Life. While waiting for the Supreme Court ruling in Dobbs versus Mississippi, King's message is to remember, quote, the baby, of course, having civil rights, should have the right to be treated with human dignity. The mother, of course, is going to need support. The father needs to come into the picture, and then the family and the community. And I believe we could recognize there are other ways to help a mother, child, father, and a community without killing anyone, close quote. Sitting with her before the dinner on Saturday, she looked at her itinerary for the evening. The GOP equals Growth and Opportunity Party slogan caught her eye. open quote. We have an opportunity to make a difference, King said. In this generation and this decade, there's an opportunity to support life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness together, close quote. But let's talk about at the end of the column, but let's talk about the lack of media coverage first. Maggie DeMauro contacted me in frustration when she hadn't heard back from the Spokesman Review or any of the radio or TV outlets she'd talked to by Friday night before the events. She also told me the Inlander had only been interested in talking to U.S. Senate candidate Tiffany Smiley, so she knew the press releases had at least gotten through to some people. So I made time to come into the city on that Saturday night for the Lincoln Day dinner, the Spokane County Republicans' biggest annual event and one that had been postponed since 2020. I knew Dr. King was coming. I'm on the GOP newsletter list, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it for the non-political community events on Sunday. As it turned out, my editor felt terrible they'd missed the weekend's events and did a search of the newspaper's email system the night that she got my column turned in and looked at the spam folders to try and see what happened. She's got the IT people on it as well. There clearly was a glitch, and she'll be following up on test messaging to see why the press release invitations to attend weren't going through into their system. I appreciate her concern and her offer to help troubleshoot. But something else did occur to me. It's a bit odd no one in the newsroom seemed to be monitoring the Spokane County GOP newsletter, and Alveda King's trip to Spokane was a surprise to them. It implies a certain lack of diversity within the editorial staff. I wish I'd been able to attend the Sunday events, but here's a good description from Anthony DeMauro, Maggie's son, as posted on his Facebook page the day after. Anthony wrote, "It was a privilege being the chauffeur for Dr. Alveda King, who is a humble, God-loving woman. On Saturday, she spoke on the civil rights movement and the history of the Republican Party. On Sunday, my mother organized a well-received luncheon where community leaders of all backgrounds came together in a roundtable format to try and take down the walls which polarize us. Dr. Alveda King expertly handed the mic around the room, facilitating conversations on race and how to bridge the divide blocking our hearts. Later on Sunday at St. Mary's Catholic Church, Dr. Alveda King spoke on pro-life issues in the upcoming generation. Overall, it was a wonderful weekend filled with empowering speeches and motivating calls to action." End of Anthony's writing. I really am sorry I missed the Sunday morning events. I just couldn't rearrange my schedule. I had other commitments. And the response to the column was almost uniformly positive, except for one persistent naysayer. We exchanged many emails, and because he asked questions that were worth responding to, but at the end, he wrote that he thinks it's funny that I keep writing about unity and then criticizing Governor Inslee's handling of the pandemic. Disagreeing with how a politician is handling his responsibilities is not an indication of a lack of interest in unity. I have no doubt that even Governor Inslee and I are unified in wanting what is best for Washington. We just see the definition of the problem, how to balance the priorities and the best possible options differently. And we don't build unity in a citizenry by ignoring differences or by ignoring input from half the state. Galen's second objection was that Dr. King's positions generally are consistent with the Republican platform, and it isn't newsworthy when a group invites a keynote speaker who agrees with them. But by that standard, it would mean never covering anyone invited as a keynote speaker to any group. Keynote speakers are generally chosen because they support the mission of the group, whether it's the Women Helping Women Luncheon, the Spokane River Keepers, or the Spokane County Democrats or Spokane County Republicans. And I'll share our last exchange. He really was persistent. Galen wrote, "Dr. King, quote, is an anti-abortion activist and is not a civil rights pioneer. She is a Fox News contributor and anti-gay marriage. So you think the fact that she is Black somehow gives you some points or makes her a civil rights activist? You think that inviting a Black anti-abortion Republican means you are somehow promoting unity? Once again, you are just burrowing deeper into your cocoon." That was his final. Actually, that wasn't his final. He kept going, but I started to ignore it. But from my reply to that email, Black Americans are opposed to same-sex marriage at a higher percentages than other demographic groups, so it's hardly surprising that Alveda King is one of them. Neither is it surprising that someone with pro-life views that are now anathema to the Democratic Party has to seek out a platform on Fox News. MSNBC isn't likely to call her up. King served as a Democrat in the Georgia legislature and ran for Congress as a Democrat. She supports pro-life candidates now, and there are no longer any visible pro-life Democrats. She explicitly made it clear to me personally and to the Republicans she was speaking to on that Saturday night that she is not a Republican, but an independent. She spoke about being arrested at civil rights protests over housing, about her parents' home being firebombed by segregationists, her family members, not just Martin Luther King Jr., who have been murdered in the cause of fighting for civil rights. What I hear you saying, Galen, is that voting for a Republican means you can't be a civil rights activist, or if you were one in the past, now your civil rights activist card is revoked. And that's not a defensible position. When you oppose abortion as the taking of a human life and seek to build systems to support women and men so they are not faced with the desperate choice of killing a baby as a solution to a tough situation, the political choice is now clear. I was hoping, Galen, that we could reach common ground on the question of newsworthiness, but at least we have had an invigorating and civil conversation. That's where unity has to start, conversation seeking common ground. And that was the message that Dr. Alveda King brought to Spokane in those 3 meetings she had on that weekend. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Reader Feedback for Forthright. Follow on Substack for notifications of new material, and look forward to connecting again.